Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Skinwalker horror stories. First story. Did I meet a skinwalker in New Mexico? A year or so ago, I left England for the summer in order to travel a bit and maybe find some work abroad for a few months. I managed to stumble across a decently paying job as a farmhand in the northwestern area of the Navajo Nation Reservation in New Mexico. The farmer was looking for somebody to help him with busy work over the summer and allowed me to sleep in what I can only describe as a cabin. Basically a big shed he had renovated in order to house whoever he had working for him at that moment in time. It was a large farmland, and the shed was situated pretty much parallel to the house across the largest field of crops. Living in this shed with me was a half-Native American boy who was about the same age as me. Name's Ahiga. Apologies if I misspell. It's been a while since I've wrote or spoke his name. Anyway, I arrived at the cabin after a long and stressful journey by plane and then pretty much hitchhiking my way across the USA. I met the farmer and the boy, and they both seemed friendly enough. Everything was smooth sailing for around 2 weeks, even with the relentless heat beating down on my pale English skin. Ahiga and I became close as we were around each other 24/7. He would always tell me interesting stories of Navajo legend. He often told me of the Yee-Nald-Lushi skinwalkers in detail, and he seemed very knowledgeable on the subject. He told me how he dreamed of these creatures often. It seemed like he had some kind of morbid obsession with these things. I chalked it all up to horror stories and didn't really put any stock into what he was saying, although it did interest me. I've never been one to believe in or fear the supernatural. One evening after a heavy day of work, I headed back to the cabin to shower and change. I got back to the cabin, showered, got changed, and sat down on my bed. There was no sign of Ahiga yet, which was weird because he would usually be back by now. I waved it off and left my cabin to head into the nearest town, if he was just to explore a bit more of the land I was staying in. I explored for a while and found a nearby bar to drink in, as I hadn't had a single drink since moving here. I left the bar at around 10:30 p.m. and it was pretty much fully dark. I began to walk back to the farm. As I walked back along the windy road, I felt as if I was being watched. I walked on a bit faster and made my way across to the farm. As I walked around the farmer's house, I noticed what looked like someone carrying a bag under their arm. Leaving my cabin, something felt and looked not right about this figure and its movements. I went stealth mode almost instinctively and took the long way around the field, hiding behind the fencing. I managed to get a good angle on the figure. As he stood up, the light shining from with the cabin illuminated, and I saw that it was Ahiga. At first I was relieved, but then I saw how erratically he was moving, almost with no rhythm at all. Under his arm, he clutched a dog's severed head. I felt sick to my stomach and ducked down, but managed to compose myself. I poked my head up to check once more, and he was heading off into the forest. I took this opportunity to dart for the cabin and pull my keys out to unlock the door. As I got close, I tripped and dropped my keys and thundered to the ground. I propelled myself back up and turned to see why I fell and saw I had tripped over the rest of the beheaded dog. I swung around to look towards the woods and saw Ahiga on all fours, not like an animal, but like a person with their arms and legs bent in the wrong direction. It felt as if he was looking directly into my soul. He had 2 yellow, glowing eyes and a confused look on his crooked face. "I am Ahiga," I think he tried to say, but the words were guttural and frothy, almost like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I unlocked the door and bolted inside, locking it behind me and closing all the curtains and windows in the cabin. I sat awake all night, hearing noises and feeling watched somehow. I'd hear whatever it was at the door now, and again, pretending to be Ahiga. It would repeat parts of the stories Ahiga he'd been telling me whenever we relaxed in the cabin together on previous nights, and every time it showed up, a horrific smell filled the cabin and made me vomit a few times. In the end, the harassment stopped and daylight began to shine through the curtains. I checked out the window and saw nothing outside. I quickly gathered all my possessions and got out of there. I flew back to England the next week after using all my farmhand money to rent a hotel room on the East Coast as far away from the place as I could. I often wonder what happened to Ahiga, but I'm glad I didn't wait around to find out. Many of you won't believe this story, but I can assure you it's 100% true, and I still think about it at night to this day. I'm still not sure what I saw, but sometimes I still feel as if I'm being watched, but I think this may be paranoia. There's no stories of these things following you across the pond, is there? The Skinwalker. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. That is to say, I get the occasional kick out of the horoscope, and my boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist. We even joke about how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. Refuses to even think of it. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious. Just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so recently, I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sister, and I went to Colorado for an entire week of vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit the national parks, and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting, and so much more. I was excited, and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove a grueling 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an extremely wet but exhilarating day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We arrived at sunset, so it was too late to do anything, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, to put it nicely. It was all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy lodging cabins were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs on its sheets. I shudder at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cozy fire, and soon a few other visitors came out to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and all our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I love stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west. We're in Native American territory. Why not liven the place up with my favorite local myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers? Now, for the uninitiated, Skinwalkers are very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its pelt, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story, after all? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties, really just retold an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker as the monster instead. I improvised a lot of the story and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen, swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it. A man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was as good a time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps. No car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabins sat, and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour. I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against the cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet gray night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long. Its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud, wet smacking sound as it cracked against my foot, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking. But I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slip my feet out of those flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that thing was gone. It was gone. It knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh, yet I still couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed, "Run, run, run, you run." I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively. Even though I knew better, I still turned around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh, its eyes. Staring at me, unblinking, with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that thing. I ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain. I ignored my body screaming in agony. I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping on my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, bolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it could no longer take me by surprise. My mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that. And as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it. Said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really like scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. Second story. I hunt skinwalkers for a living. For the public, my contact details aren't available. If they were, I'm sure I'd be hit up with many false calls, both on purpose and accidental. My number is reserved for the higher-ups who piece together if my service is needed. And last night it was. Publicly, there were a number of disappearances reported around a little hiking trail in Utah. A terrible thing, but not too uncommon. However, on the social media of the recently missing family and friends, there were some statuses that caught my higher-ups' attention. Some of them posted that during a memorial at the edge of the trails, they felt they could hear their dearly beloved's voice calling to them from the thick of the woods. Though they took this as a sign from God and hoped that this meant the missing would return, the people monitoring their personal pages felt otherwise, and that's where I came in. Skinwalkers are dangerous. In terms of raw strength, they outmatch us in almost every way. But it's their cunning that truly makes them the apex predator they are. I was called in to investigate as soon as I could. When I arrived, the police were there, the colorful lights bouncing around like a rave show. Leaning against the cars were a number of beat cops, sent there for the satisfaction of the locals that something was being done. I could tell they had a disdain the moment I approached, as this meant their quiet night of fooling around was to be disturbed with actual work. Trails closed, one said, a tone of finality to the words. I was called in to investigate. I shot back. That's our job. Let us handle things here. You could just go home, he replied. The exasperation in his tone told me he wanted me to just leave. Afraid I can't do that, I sighed. With that, he just stared at me. I could see the gears grinding in his head along with his teeth. He gestured for me to join the rest of them, and I informed them everything I was legally allowed to divulge. That I was sent there from higher orders, and they were to let me do my job. However, a hitch I always run into is verifying the authority. You see, the paperwork I come in with always has no contact information for obvious reason. But this means I'm always faced with skepticism. In the end, I was met with a compromise. I could go in, but I was to take one of them as a partner to keep an eye on me, and my gun was to be confiscated. I begrudgingly agreed, knowing this was the best I was going to get if I wanted to go in that night. I was left to go into the thick of the woods with my new partner in crime, Austin. If I thought the guys back at the cars were begrudging and talking to me, Austin was practically dragging his heels. It seemed obvious that he had the lowest seniority, as he never even had a chance to protest about this arrangement. How long are we going to be out here? He groaned. As long as we need to, I said back, quieter than him. We've searched the trails a dozen times over. You're not going to find anything, he protested. You don't know what I'm looking for, I shot back, still at a lower tone. What are you looking for then? He whined, his voice carrying through the trees. With the way things were going, anything within a mile was going to hear us clearly. He had no tact for being inconspicuous. But I knew asking him to be quiet would be met with more questions, so instead I tried a different approach. Have you heard of skinwalkers? I asked him, breaking him out interrogation. Of course, they're a popular legend around these parts. They're often told to warn hikers not to wander too far. Do you know where they came from? Old native legends. You try and scare me or something. Correct. The legend stems more specifically from the Navajo, a southwestern Native American tribe. I shot back, ignoring his question. He scoffed at this, seemingly not wanting to hear more, but I continued. In the Navajo language, the word skinwalker is Inagloshii and translates to he who walks on all fours. He grunted at my ignorance of his hints for me to shut up. However, when I talked, he didn't, and I spoke in a much softer tone than he did. I knew he needed stimulation to stop moaning. He was obviously bored and uninterested, so I decided to keep him distracted with a tale. I used to walk some of these trails when I was younger. I grew up rural, so hiking was the #1 pastime for a lot of my friends, and I started. Yeah, a lot of people did. Some pretty popular walks round these parts. He bemused, not yet interested in my words. Well, this carried over to my adult life. When the stresses of my job got me down, I'd take to the trails and woods to calm myself. It was my form of meditation. You'll be surprised the amount of kind spirits you can bump into when in nature. It seems to brings out the best in people. That must be what she saw in me. I met her during a walk. Nothing grand, just doing what everyone takes for granted in a densely wooded area, and she was jogging the same trail. We stuck together for the rest of the way, and we're inseparable ever since. 2 years later, I called Regina my wife. Mom, Austin grunted, still not pulled in, but was now at least quiet. When we had our kid, Davis, I passed down this love for nature to him. He caught the bug as hard as I did his age, and we bonded as a family during our outings. We knew the land well. Too well. So we decided to trails off to a lesser walked area. Our sense of adventure was at full swing. We knew we were more than experienced enough to look after ourselves. We had many tools to help us if we fell too far from society. But getting lost wasn't our downfall. I carried on. At that last statement, Austin's brow furrowed. Now, I knew I had his attention. Though he didn't say anything, I felt he wanted me to go on. We'd set up camp. It was quiet, a serene peace at first, but it was because of that solitude that the sound of a twig snap pulled us from our trance. The more creaks and crunches we heard, the more we realized how unnatural the silence was. It was an overbearing pressure that was only broken by the slowly approaching snaps of sound. The closest we heard it was the perimeter of our camp, and it stopped. We eventually settled down, but we never lost the feeling of being watched. I could hear the breaths through Austin's nose. Whether it was from exertion or anticipation of the story, he would probably never tell me the truth. The day after, things felt tense. We carried on with our excursion, but our backs always felt prickled with feelings of tension. It only took one lapse of judgment, and it was ironically when nature called. My son, Davis, just wanted to go potty. He told us he needed to go before sleep, so we let him out, autopilot in full swing after a heavy set of mental fatigue. It didn't take long for us to realize our error, but that was all it took. We slipped out our tent and cautiously made our way to our designated toilet area, and Regina quietly called out for Davis. He didn't answer. All that could be heard was our increasing breathing as panic started to set, but it was quickly broken by a meek voice calling out. I paused, purposefully. I could feel Austin's gaze on me while he waited for more, something I withheld. Eventually he burst out saying what happened next, seemingly out of impulse. I smiled, lavishing his attention, and carried on. It's okay, Regina. I'm right here, Davis exclaimed jovially as he slowly stepped half into the light of the campfire. Thank God, Regina soothed, rushing over to scoop him up in her arms. By the time I realized what jarred me, it was too late. What fun I was having scaring this fully grown man was gone by this point. This is the part of the story I hated telling the most. I didn't even wait for a response before going on. Davis's arm shot out, sharper than it had any right to be, and pulled her, torso first into the darkness behind. Watching this, I froze, The words Davis spoke ringing in my head. Davis never called us by our names. I was kicking myself that I should have known sooner. I gritted my teeth. Even though I'd told this story many times before, to prepare people for what may come, it never got easier to tell. Still, I felt obliged to finish my story. I wanted to go after them. I wanted to rush in and pull them back from the brink of wherever they were. They supported this idea, Regina and Davis whining out for me to come to them, to save them, to join them. But their cadence was off, their emotions absent. I knew it was a trap, so I just dropped down and wept. All that lay after I finished the tale was silence. Austin's pace slowed as his mind deliberated on the information I spoon-fed him. I could practically see the cogs turning in his head while he weighed the words I said on his scales of skepticism. Another toll on his mind was that I'd distracted him enough to the point that we were far into the appointed trail I was to investigate. When I figured he'd reached an acceptance that he was stuck with me, I started asking questions about the case. I asked about the victims, where they went missing, when it happened, what's been found. I got him to put pockmarks on my map, and that gave me some set areas to search. And search we did, to the moans and complaints from Austin, for 2 hours. I did my best to ignore him, and was quite casual in my work until I found something small and white poking from the ground quite a ways away from the trail. A small piece of bone. I immediately hushed him in a serious tone, and he took note. A reaction that was seemingly instilled by the mood I set earlier. I inspected it carefully, trying to figure out its origins. The serious look on Austin's face washed away immediately when he saw what I was looking at. You got worked up over that? A piece of chicken bone. I ignored him while I surveyed the ground for more. He sighed and resigned himself to just stand there. But I had a new objective. Follow the trail of bone fragments. There were more scattered in one particular direction, and if I was careful and observant, I would find another piece, then another, then another. Eventually, I found its origin. A body. However, it was not recently departed. The body before me, clad in torn, colorful ribbons of hiking gear, had been there for a number of months, maybe years. Old and decayed. The cop turned his head at this. Great, more paperwork, he must have been thinking. Finding a body this old is nothing but a headache for authorities. A cold investigation of wasted time lay before his feet. But I could recognize the work of a skinwalker anywhere. Knowing Austin would not take what I told him 100% seriously, I gave him the most simplest of instructions. Austin, I want you to keep a lookout for something that looks like a hollowed-out dog. Can you do that for me? Sure, whatever, he sighed in acceptance. I took to investigating the body closer. The skin being removed completely was the first thing I noticed. But when I inspected the bones, I noticed they had been scraped away. Not gnawed or chewed, but scraped. Oh no, I thought. Quick! I yelled to Austin, and I reached into my pack. Put this on. I held out a mask, similar to the one I was putting on myself at the same time. I was obviously met with apprehension, but my tone got to him, on top of my own urgent actions, and he followed suit. And just in time, too, as an ominous, obsidian cloud blew in around us. I forcefully covered my face in reaction. What is this? Austin blurted, muffled by the mask. Though I could tell he wouldn't believe me, I told him that skinwalkers make poisons from bodies. I knew he'd deny the part about the skinwalker, but he couldn't deny the danger around him. I slipped my hand behind me and pulled out my small blade. A needle-thin, stake-like dagger. A crisp sheen flickered from its polished silver metal. I squinted over to see Austin withdraw his pistol. I knew it wouldn't work. However, I didn't want to discourage him since I knew it'd still help as a distraction at best. What I also saw was that he didn't cover his face when the cloud blew in. Something I felt I shouldn't have had to tell him, but he didn't figure out in time. He was screaming in pain, rubbing the dust from his eyes, only making it worse since his arms and hands must have been coated by now. Before I had a chance to help him, he darted away, trying to get out the cloud. A rookie mistake. I left after him at a more cautious pace. I eased my way to where he went, following his panic shouting. The juxtaposition of not believing what I told him to being attacked seemed to have sent him in a bit of a frenzy. Though his skepticism was still apparent as he called out to his assailant like they were a human. "Give yourself up, and you will be shown proper treatment." He screamed. A terrible bluff. "I got him. Over here," I heard me say, which flipped his mood immediately. "Thank God. They're going to pay for this," he said threateningly through a grin and shot off towards my voice. Except it wasn't me who said that. I didn't get a chance to stop him before I heard him jump into a nearby bush, followed by horrific screaming. It echoed around and faded away at frightening speed, further into the wooded area away from where I was, trying to avoid me coming in to help. I thought I stood up, sighed while stretching my aching limbs from all that sneaking, and got to work. Knowing I wouldn't be disturbed, I casually made my way around and set up wards all around the main trail. I saw some side trails, but ignored those. The cheapskates only pay for the main trail, so they only get the main trail. When I made my way to the edge of the trail, ready to call it quits, I saw them. Two familiar figures, with fresh smears of red on their faces and hands. My fist clenched at the sight of them. They don't have to do any threatening movements to provoke me, because they know how to get to me. After all these years, they consistently taunt me with the skins of Regina and Davis. Tattered, barely held together, but I recognized them regardless. It was dawn by the time I was done. I emerged from the trail and met the other police officers from before. They had less energy to challenge me this time, as they seemed tired from their long night of escapades. I told them I was done and grabbed my stuff. They asked where Austin was, and I told them he said he'd head back to meet them not long ago in an innocent tone, acting oblivious to everything that went down. I used their confusion as a chance to slip away and headed back. I informed the higher-ups that there shouldn't be a problem at that specific trail anymore, and that I'm open for any more work they send my way. But I didn't tell them the gritty details. That's the secret with my job. 99% of the time, the skinwalker never gets killed. I mean, they're damn near impossible to kill. You either have to burn their hidden skin, which they make damn well impossible to find, whisper their original human name, but that's often lost to the ethers of time, or somehow overpower them and kill them with silver, which I mean, good luck with that if you want to try. I've been around so long because I've been smart. I just work on cutting down their hunting grounds one trail at a time. Third story. My encounter with the mutilated victims of skinwalkers. I have a story. Those 4 simple words came out of my older brother's mouth back at that very night of July 24th, 2009, over a decade ago. A night that has since haunted and left me curious of what was truly wandering in the woodlands of that little oak forest. I've spent hours every night for the past year trying to find anything online that would at least give me as something as simple as the name of that forest, but I've never found it. I stared up at him, looking at his pale, round face, illuminated by the orange glow of the campfire separating the two of us. I glared for a split second, cleared my throat as I hadn't said anything to anyone for the past few hours, and spoke with a condescending but humoring tone to my voice. "You're kidding." No, I wasn't a disbeliever in cryptids, ghouls, and any monster that lurked in the dark crevices of the earth, whether they were undiscovered beings and creatures or something else entirely. But I obviously knew that whatever was going to come out of my brother's mouth was going to be a load of bologna. Allow me to describe what I mean. He's not a good liar, but always seemed to find it amusing no matter the situation. He'd tell my mother with a straight face that he didn't take one of my belongings, even though he was obviously hiding it behind his back. He'd tell my frustrated dad, who had just read his not-so-successful report card, that his C in algebra was a typo. In the end, my parents also had to sarcastically tell them that they believe him, and no matter what he did, never punished him for it. Even though my mom can see his arm folded behind his back, and my dad can most definitely tell that Mr. Harris would not make a typo on something as crucial as a school report card, but their inability to continue fighting with him became more and more distinct throughout the years. Because, One thing that was especially present to his lies that he absolutely would never admit to his lies. One night back in 2003, my mom walked into his room and told him that he shouldn't be playing video games because he obviously didn't finish his homework, and this resulted in a full-blown tantrum by a literal 9-year-old. He crossed his arms, did his notorious scowl, and stomped his feet until my mom threw her hands up and walked out in frustration, leaving him to resume playing on his PS2 and ignoring the fact that his science teacher, Mrs. White, would blow a vein in her forehead when she discovers his unfinished homework. And just a few years later, when he was 11 years old, he angrily refused to talk to my father about the detention he received that January afternoon. His PE teacher had caught him shoving down a girl in his class, and when he confronted him, he angrily screamed and spat in his face until he had to literally drag him out by the arm of the PE class. I remember his quotes so vividly that night, to his constantly changing story that he was trying to keep explaining to my father. I didn't do it. Melissa pushed me first. Mr. Davis is the one lying, and he pushed me first. My attempts at relenting against him, telling him that a teacher wouldn't just push a student because they felt like, were met with angry yells directed toward me, exclamations that I was the stupid liar. So, yeah, if you couldn't tell, I'm not very fond of my brother, but I'm entirely off topic. Immediately, my brother scowls in frustration. My sarcastic remark had already upset him, and I knew that if I didn't dial it back in a few seconds, my parents, sleeping inside the RV, would be immediately awakened and get on MY case for making my brother upset. No, I'm serious. God, Michael, can you not be an asshole for 2 seconds? My brother was a foul mouth. It started when he was 14 years old, and he pretty much cherished his vocabulary of swear words. Both of my parents were floored when the first time he casually dropped an F-bomb during dinner. And while my mom didn't care what he said, unless it was an insult directed toward someone, my dad made it absolutely clear that he wanted absolutely no swears in his presence again, and if not, he'd make him mow our huge front lawn every week for the next month. Yet when I was the one who got caught, my dad would go ballistic and claim he'd trash every electronic in my room if he caught me swearing. Again, whatever. Fine. I'll humor you, Josh. Tell me your story. Take it seriously. I thought it would be nice, seeing how we're near this campfire in the middle of a cool night. I rolled my eyes, just barely able to contain any more sarcastic remarks toward him. All right, I will. Go ahead. I leaned back at the fallen log I was sitting on, vividly remembering how uncomfortable it was, but that it was better than sitting on the ground and having my mother get frustrated the next morning when she sees the stains of grass and dirt on the back of my pants. I vividly remember my brother look around, almost as if he was searching for something. He was most definitely eager to tell me his story. Yet when I let him, he suddenly became completely unprepared. I swallowed the urge to chuckle in a few seconds. He asked me a question I didn't anticipate. You know what a skinwalker is, right, Mikey? I hated it when he called me Mikey because most of the time he does it to annoy me, but did he just ask me what a skinwalker is? I mean, I recognized the name and some details of what exactly one was, but I had no idea he even cared about mythological creatures. I immediately began to think, trying to remember details, and the only thing I could prominently remember was that they were mythical monsters that could disguise themselves as humans by wearing their flayed skin like a suit. Sure, yeah. No, you don't. He scoffs and crosses his arms. Now, all we're missing is the repeated stomping and scarlet red coloration to his face, and we'll have a blown-up episode. Fine, explain to me. He begins to speak, talking in this obnoxiously ghoulish voice, doing those stereotypical, oh, ghost noises. In as much as detail he could remember, he informed that skinwalkers are Navajo witches or warlocks capable of utilizing black magic to shapeshift into animals, either through possession or disguising by flaying the pelt off the animal and draping it over them, like some sort of demented suit of flesh and skin. And as I expected, that very method can be done to humans. I remember that he tells me a specific detail that even after learning about mythological skinwalkers online, I don't seem to understand where he got from. Maybe he either made it up or got it from an odd source. I want to bring it up to see if others know about it. And they say that the longer the witches and warlocks wear their striped coats to disguise themselves, they become more and more of the very being they're disguising as. The skin suits may eventually merge into their skin and become their new exterior one day, or gradually, bit by bit, they begin to sprout irreversible animalistic features. Gray wolf fur, white eagle feathers, green snake scales. They start to hallucinate, lose memories, become confused, and eventually absolutely psychotic, and eventually revert to a completely animalistic phase, losing all of their humanity for good. The skinwalkers become their own skin. All skinwalkers know that they must not wear skin suits, composed out of various different sources, as if they become their skin. He chuckles slightly. Quite the patchwork abomination may come out. They don't have a nickname for those types of transformed skinwalkers, probably because they're so horrific that they should never be named. I'm a bit brought back. For once in his life, what was coming out of his mouth was actually interesting to hear, whether it was a lie or not. He seems to see my petrified state, mesmerized by his story, and slowly speaks again, asking me a question. Now, when a skinwalker steals one's skin, what happens to the body? It took a few seconds to respond back, as I had to abruptly escape my trance. I had no idea. Maybe they ate it. Maybe they disposed of it via burial. Maybe they dismember them and stick their severed limbs together to make makeshift meat scarecrows to traumatize the village the now deceased person was from. It took me a second before eventually I had a pretty odd answer, but a pretty plausible one. They're witches, right? What if they turn them into mindless puppets, like minions or something like that? My brother's eyes widen for a split second, and he continues. You got it right on the money, somewhat. I was stunned for a few seconds, too. I didn't expect that to be the absolute right answer, so I was quite shocked that apparently my weird guess was right. Again, my brother continues. They call them the skinned victims of skinwalkers. The whole process of becoming a skinned can't seem to work on animals, and it's believed it's because their brains aren't complex enough, but the process can't work on most humans. They become reanimated, like zombies, but not quite. From head to toe, their skin has been removed, usually in a completely crude fashion, exposing layers and layers of peeled-back flesh, lacerated muscles, and exposed tendons. They may be severely injured in appearance, as death by skinwalker is no clean one, so claw marks and tears could be dug into their flesh, leaving open scars that never heal. The lower half of their skulls has been peeled open, exposing the skull's jawbone and the permanently exposed teeth of the person. Some say the tongue is gouged out prior to the process, so that the skin can't call for help if it retains some humanity, while some say the eye sockets are stabbed, blinding the skin so it can't see what it's become. Some say the skinned have twisted limbs, forcing them to walk on all fours along the forest floor. And some say the skinned are disemboweled, leaving empty abdominal cavities with no present organs. People don't know why they do this, but most believe it's simply the result of inflicted wounds prior to death, and punctured holes through the side of the chest, through the heat, may symbolize that the skinwalker is a past lover of the victim who had their heart broken and thus seeks revenge by stabbing straight through their own, right before death. I got very curious, so I decided to shoot him a simple question. Why do the witches make the skinned? What's the point of having minions if they're all damaged, reanimated corpses? Again, you were somewhat right. I glared at him confused. The skinned are not brought to life by the skinwalker themselves. When they obtain their skin suits, they usually abandon them to allow the elements to do the rest, break down their exposed bodies, and turn them into mulch to be absorbed into the earth over the course of several years. But through some supernatural influence, perhaps a failed attempt at revival, through another outer force, the corpse becomes a skinned. I stop glaring and ask another question. If they're not minions, what do they do? My brother chuckles again. I could see why, as he loved everything gruesome. He saw Freddy vs. Jason when it came out in theaters back in 2003 and had the time of a life. They looked for their stolen skin. They roamed the forest they were killed in for eternity, searching for whatever bastard witch or warlock left them a bleeding husk. The supernatural essence within them leaves them unable to rot and die. But over the years, their soul begins to crumple, and what little humanity was trapped in the near-mindless being they have become fades away for good. The skinned are flayed of not just their bodies, but their humanity. I shivered pretty damn hard. Shit was scary. The idea of having some mythical creature robbing you of your skin and turning you into an undying zombie, endlessly searching for your lost flesh as you mentally wither in a nothing freaked me out, so much that my brother immediately noticed as he laughs and points toward me. "Hi, you're scary. I can see you shaking." I didn't like being caught in a moment of fear, so I retaliated. "No, I'm shivering because it's cold." That was a half-lie. While the faint wind brushed against my back, the glowing heat in front of me mostly canceled it out. Obviously, my brother caught me in my bluff, pointing at the nearby campfire, which was gradually dying down by now. "Oh yeah, I'm sure it's absolutely freezing and dark too. If only there was something here that could provide us heat and light." "All right, fine. You did scare me, but the fire's dying down. Let's just go in the RV and get to bed. It's probably way too late, and Dad didn't want us to stay up late, so we can wake up tomorrow." "No way. We're going to be back on the road tomorrow by noon. I want to spend as much time here as I can. We could just sleep in the RV during the day. Then, do you have any suggestions about what we can do?" I can continue telling you a story. A friend of mine told me that he ran into a skinwalker a few years ago, wearing the skin suit of a dead wolf. I don't think he was noticing the gradually fading glow of the campfire, so I pointed it out to him. "Fire is dying down. It's because nearly all our fuel has been used up. Mikey, do me a solid and go get some twigs. Josh, you want me to go out into the dark, damp forest, alone, and in the middle of the night to go get more fuel? What? You scared that a skinwalker will pop out and take your skin? Don't be a wimp. There's sticks everywhere. It's not like you have to walk miles to find some. Come on and hurry before the fire's dead." "Nah. Rock, paper, scissors for it, and number 2 out of 3. If I win, you do it." My brother scoffs in frustration, mumbling "fine" under his breath, and stands up, approaching me. I vividly remember our little match of RPS. I was hoping that I didn't have to go, as I didn't feel like doing so. But my choice of scissors against his choice of rock proved otherwise. I win. Rock breaks scissors. "Now go." My brother quickly speaks and points over my shoulder. I grumbled in frustration, but knew I couldn't protest, as it was my idea. So I turned around, kicked my feet, and took a couple slow steps. My brother's joking demand of "if the fire's dead before you're back, the skinwalker might get you," got on my nerves, but motivated me to pick up the pace as I wanted to be done with it as soon as possible. I think I was walking for a good few minutes. I don't remember what I was doing, but I think I just had my hands in my pockets, thinking about our little vacation trip. Back in early July, our parents thought our excessive days of just playing video games for 12 hours straight, then going to sleep, was corrupting our minds, and they wanted us to take a 5-day road trip to clear our minds. Both of them had entirely different views on video games, as while my mom normally just didn't want us to be excessively having our eyes glued to a TV screen, my dad absolutely believed in the whole idea that video games cause violence and banned graphic video games. Strictly limited video game time on the family computer, and told us games like GTA 3 were made by a bunch of lowlives who want to brainwash kids and literally turn them into raving lunatics. Until we were 18, he wanted absolutely nothing excessively violent on our gaming consoles. Or that if we're caught with it, we have to not only return the game from where we bought it, but humiliate yourself by writing an apology letter to whoever it was brought from. And if that wasn't enough salt in the wounds, very limited video games for the next month. After around 3 or so minutes, my train of thought came to a halt, and I remembered what I was out here for. I took my hands out of my pockets and searched around, eventually finding piles of fallen wooden branches on the ground, before I scooped up as much as I can with prominent handfuls before turning around and starting to make my way back. Walking back, my train of thought kept going again, and I picked up where I left off. If it wasn't obvious, my father loves to utilize fear as a scaring mechanism into stopping us from doing things he doesn't like, while my mother absolutely hates it, and it sparked countless fights between them. Just before the trip, Dad got curious one night, found some lewd sites on the history of my brother's personal computer, and lost his shit. Mom tried to tell him he was just curious, while my brother just flat out called him out on a supposed bluff. Eventually, Mom shooed us out of the living room and fought with Dad in private for an hour straight, so much that it actually exhausted him. I heard very little details through the muffled shouts in the next room over, but I could tell Mom was sick of Dad's method of traumatizing us. But Dad thinks that Mom's giving us so much freedom that we think we could do whatever we want. So, while they stated this whole road trip was to give some fresh air, I think it was mainly because of the tension in between them, but they didn't want to flat out tell us. And then I stopped. Nothing had caught my attention. My whole train of thought just stopped like it derailed. It wasn't like I just abruptly snapped back out. It's as if it had just abruptly concluded and wrapped itself up. That's what it hit me. Why I stopped. I looked around in confusion, searching through the shadowy trunks and branches of the old oak trees before me. I was frozen, and that's when I truly realized why it stopped. I didn't recognize where I was. I remember that even while I was first thinking, I could recognize subtle details in my trail. A lonely, rotted tree stump, a crumpled up can of either beer or soda resting on a pile of leaves, and a few jagged patches of gravel I had walked over. I searched and searched and searched for any of those details, but they were nowhere to be seen. No, it's not possible. I had turned around a full 180 degrees when I got those sticks. It's not like I just got lost out of nowhere. I searched. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. It was like a horror movie building up to a sudden loud jump scare. A blaring scream to deafen me, and the face of a diseased, mutated creature to lunge out of the darkness to maul me and take my skin. God damn it. God damn it. I yelled out in frustration. If my father was just a few feet away, I would have gotten a raw slap to the back of my head for yelling God's name in vain. But he wasn't. I was dead lost, in the middle of a forest, alone while it was in the middle of the night. I was immediately consumed with a chilling feeling, one stronger than the weak, ice-cold winds. It was my blood freezing and shivers running up and down my spine. It was panic. Joshua, I yelled out. I knew wherever I was, he probably couldn't hear me, but I just wanted noise in the forest, besides my own gradually quickening exhales. I yelled again, frozen in place. Joshua, nothing. No. I knew where I was just a few minutes ago. Never in my life had I felt so paranoid. I was absolutely shocked to my core. I could barely move my upper body, while everything below my pelvis was anchored to the ground. I vividly remember trying to lift my left foot, but it's as I was wearing a steel-toe boot welded to the ground. I just stood there for about a few minutes straight, just trapped in place as my breathing grew more and more hysterical. I couldn't move my legs, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't even open my hands and drop the handfuls of twigs stuck to my palms. It was so surreal, and my own personification was the only thing keeping me from full-blown trembling in absolute shock. I felt lightheaded as I was breathing like my life depended on it, and then, I heard it. The first noise within the last 8 or so minutes. A noise that I can recall in so much detail, despite its immensely short length and abruptness. I didn't even know what it was at first, but it eventually came into my mind, and when I realized what it most likely was, I nearly vomited right then and there. It was the loud crunch of a twig snapping under someone's foot. Joshua, I screamed so loud my voice cracked, and for half a second went high-pitched. At that very moment, I didn't give a shit of whatever was potentially being a wild animal or escaped, knife-wielding mental patient sneaking up on me. It's as if nothing in the world mattered to me at that very moment. A moment that only lasted just a few seconds until I heard it again. Another twig snapping. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I absolutely knew that it was getting closer. Not like this. Anything like this. I remembered that glimmers of life seemed to flash before my eyes, potential deaths in my mind. I get mauled to death by feral animals and semi-eaten. I get gutted to death by a maniacally laughing serial killer and buried under a huge patch of gravel, or I never escape my petrified state and get discovered in the morning, curled on the forest floor in the fetal position, died of exposure. Would have preferred that last method. It was the least gruesome. I then heard it. What came next was at first entirely familiar, the third snap of a twig, but was followed just milliseconds later by a sound that I can easily describe, but can't put together in words how bone-chilling it was. A slow guttural groan. It was a person, or what I was hoping it was. From the best I can put together, it was like the final breath of a smoker succumbing to lung cancer, or the mangled, raspy exhale of someone's life being sucked out them via strangulation. It was human, all right, yet not natural. It was the sound of absolute agony. No man can generate that sound at will. I heard it again. Got another listen to it, much clearer than before. It was sickening beyond disturbing, though it felt different than before, and it took me a few seconds to understand why. The first sound was an exhale, and this one was an inhale. I'm praying by now, praying that whatever is happening is just some up prank by Josh and stuff like the inability to locate those subtle details in his malformed gas, or just my mind twisting details from an excessive amount of fear. Maybe I had dozed off at the campfire, and whatever this was a nightmare. I would pinch myself if I could, but by now my fingers were stuck together, and all I could do was wiggle the tips of my thumbs. I heard it again. A twig snapping, followed by a mangled inhale. I stayed silent for a couple seconds. There it was. A twig snapping, a grotesque exhale. It was almost had a rhythm, and after a while, I seemed to recognize that the spaces in between the combination of a breaking branch and warped export or intake of breath was almost perfect every day, so much that I even counted it to be nearly exactly 6 seconds. I couldn't really tell if my fear had faded away by then. I was perplexed by these near-inhuman sounds, and the only thing affecting me was my inability to mostly move and the faint winds that I had been so long and that my teeth were chattering. Abruptly, everything just ended. The unusual noises were gone, and now I could at least hear the faint whooshing of the wind before me. I felt pins and needles in my hands and legs, so intense that they hurt, as if all the blood flow in them had stopped. I straightened my fingers, flexed my toes, and gradually lifted my left foot, finally taking my first step in what I think was at least 20 minutes. I think at that moment, I was convinced whatever just occurred was some sort of fear-induced psychotic episode. Those strange noises were auditory hallucinations my brain created, and finally, I managed to snap out of my episode, and the noises abruptly left. Though upon a couple seconds after the ending of my presumed episode, I felt an unusual warmth in my face, so I opened my left hand, allowing me to drop the mass of sticks as they crashed to the ground, and rub my face in confusion. Tears running down my eyes. I was involuntarily crying, but I now knew that it was just all a part of the episode. I started to slowly walk again, but I was still recovering from what the hell had just happened, so while I wanted to run until I knocked all the air in my lungs, I could only slowly drag my feet. I felt an overwhelming feeling of warmth wash over, a sign that everything seemed to be okay now. How absolutely wrong I was. How dead wrong I was. Never in my life had I ever been that wrong before, and my body gave me an overwhelming feeling that it was all over, but all that really was the appetizer before the main course. What happens next has traumatized me to a massive degree, and for the next few weeks, I had recurring nightmares where I'm forced to relive this moment every time. If I had a full bladder, I would have definitely emptied by then. What came next was not human. Nothing capable of living can generate this noise. Not even a demon straight out of hell could. In this horribly distorted, jarring voice I can nowhere near replicate when retelling this story to my friends and family. It uttered a single word I could not understand at first, but after this, I finally realized what it said. Skin. I don't know what scared me more, the abruptness and volume of it, or the fact that unlike the sounds of snapping twigs and raspy groans, I could understand where it was coming from. A few feet behind me. Then I heard it. The dragging, the crawling, the swishing of soil, the cracking of the branches I had dropped behind as it writhed over them, like a giant leech. Before I could fully register its existence, I had gradually spun my head around and got a good look at what it was. It was what I wasn't hoping for. It was a twisted, mutilated human being, and if you couldn't tell from all the build-up, it was a skinwalker victim, flayed nearly to the skeleton with dissected layers of muscle, flesh, and other body parts exposed, formerly under the layers of skin that formerly protected its body. I remember the face, gutted and punctured with the right side, looking like someone had taken a claw hammer to it, so much I could see sections of its skull. Its empty right eye socket and nasal cavity were crusted with a combination of what looked like dried blood and mucus, while the left eye had absolutely no color. It was dead. It was not alive. It shouldn't be alive. Its teeth, still pearly white as if it was alive and almost glowing in the moonlight, were fully exposed from the lack of lips, yet were no pair of dentures. They were gnarled, sickly, and stained with various colors of substances I didn't even want to get a better look at. I could now understand its malformed breathing, as its trachea was split wide open, exposing a gaping hole in the front of his neck. What I formerly thought was the sound of crawling was not crawling. That thing was walking on all fours, its elbows pointed up to the sky, and while I couldn't see it at first, its knees were twisted backwards, allowing to essentially move its legs backwards. One thought was in my mind during the good 10 or so seconds I had my eyes set on this creature. Not the fact that I was literally looking at a real, genuine version of the creature my brother had told me just half an hour prior, but the fact it was dragging its extremities along the ground and scuttling toward me. I heard it speak again, this time seeing its mouth move. I'll understand how it could muster fully audible words with no lips on its face and visibly damaged muscles in its jaws, but it could. Skin. Thoughts flooded my mind so rapidly that I could barely register them as soon as they popped up. What I was looking at was not a creature that should be alive. It was an abomination that freed inside from whatever rotted chamber it had been locked in years ago, and I needed to get thee away from it now. Before my body could reparalyze itself, I opened my grip, allowing me to drop my other handful of twigs before I turned around, took a random path in the direction I'd been searching, and ran like my life depended on it. And when I took off, I think it did because I heard that creature spoke the only 3 words I could understand that moment. G, give it back. Give it back. The end of its final word gradually began to warp, as it transformed into a ghoulish howl. By the time I got around 10 or so yards from it, I heard its howl twist into what I could describe as an ear-splitting shriek, one my brother would never have the lung capacity to do. I knew what I did. I pissed it off, and before I could start praying that it was slower than me, I remember what kind of being I was dealing with. I heard several twigs break per second, somehow through its agonizing screech. It was chasing. It was chasing me. I didn't know how long I ran, but I ran until there was little air in my lungs and stomach bile in my throat. I narrowly threw up in my mouth, yet I kept running because I could hear that thing in hot pursuit. And through an absolute miracle, I saw it. The silhouette of my parents' RV through the gnarled branches I was plowing through, blocking my face with my arm and leaving tiny cuts across the underside of his forearm. Through the gaps in my fingers that was shielding my face, I can see glimmers of the smoke rising from the now extinguished campfire. The second I had escaped the trees and pretty much flung myself into the empty area where my parents had set up a campfire, I immediately emptied my stomach's contents. My vomit was hot and boiling from all the stress I had just inflicted on my body, and it scorched the inside of my throat. I glanced upwards, My vision reduced from the tears and sweat in my eyes, but I could see the outline of my brother standing just a few feet over me. "Michael, holy shit, where the hell have you been?" That's when I realized something. I had not just escaped. There was no finish line. That was still after me, and within seconds, I jumped up to my feet, my legs aching and my entire body just overheated. Never in my life had I ran as much as that. Nowhere near as more than any miles I've run in PE class. I could only muster out a couple words before my voice was canceled out by the petrifying scream of the creature. It had stopped screaming for a few seconds, just enough for my brother to not get a full listening of it, because it had lost me, but both an extremely exhausted me and my own brother were in its radius. I can remember what I said as clear as ever. "We need to get in the RV right now." My brother told me at a later date that when he heard that screech of whatever was in the forest, he had almost shit himself right there. Before I could even blink, he had his arms scooped under his armpits, and he had me dragged into the RV within a span of around 5 seconds. Did it so fast that I was shocked he didn't get a hernia, and to this day, this is the greatest thing he's ever done to me. If he had left me in a panic, I would not be online writing this story. That thing would have burst out of the shadows, wrap an outstretched hand around my ankle, and drag me into the darkness where we would never been seen again. The booming bang of my brother slamming the RV door and locking it immediately woke both of my parents. But before my father could self-detonate and chew him out for waking them up, their gazes immediately averted to me, who was left a sweating, crying, retching mass on the RV floor. I remember my mother immediately coming to my aid, horrified because, as she would tell me years later, she had never seen in such a state of absolute disarray before. My father interrogated my brother, unsure what to make of my current state, but believing my brother was behind it. My ears were ringing badly, but I could hear what he was telling him. "There's something in the woods. We heard it scream, and it didn't sound like a wild animal." My father showed immediate disbelief, but I remember through choking gasps of air, I assured him that I ran directly into it, and it chased me out of the woods. My parents were mortified upon realization that my brother wasn't lying again, and my father urgently asked what I had seen in the woods. I remember what I said, word for word. It was a person on all fours with no skin. What came next was a blur. My own body was starting to power down from how much energy I had drained myself of, and even though I struggled to stay awake, just in seconds, I felt myself slip out of consciousness. All I remember is my brother frantically telling something to my parents, and my panicking mother scooped me up. I woke up an undetermined time later, and a couple years later, while reciting the story to my brother, he told me that I was out for around 11 hours straight, and I slept dead silent. I remember waking up in the back of the RV on my bed, my dad driving, my mom in the front seat, and my brother on his bed, laying down and playing his Nintendo DS. Everyone was silent, and my brain was flooded so much that it took me hours to remember the events of last night. My brother and I talked just an hour later. I asked him what the actual happened just last night, and he told me to not talk about it at all until we got home. I didn't particularly understand he meant at first, and just a couple hours later, I discovered that our road trip had been cut a day short. However, it would be years until I would understand what truly happened after I lost consciousness. My mother said nothing, while my father always silenced me, telling me he never wanted to speak of it. My brother was the only one who would talk to me about it, but told me he didn't remember what happened after I passed out either, since he fell asleep as well and wanted to hear from my father, but he always acted as if it never even seemed to happen. I had my nightmares. They plagued me so bad, but they eventually went away. Some were either me re-experiencing when I was paralyzed in the middle of the forest, listening to the sounds of snapping twigs and distorted groans, while some were me fleeing from that horrific creature that was chasing me, hysterically screaming. After around a few months, the whole thing escaped my mind. I wasn't until somehow, over a decade later, the whole experience reappeared in my mind during a conversation with my brother about past vacations, and that road trip popped up. I remember talking to him over lunch, and surprisingly, he found the whole thing so mysterious and odd. I asked him a few questions. Some I remember was how long I was gone, and he informed me it was at least over half an hour, and he got extremely worried I'd gotten lost. I told him that I did and described my whole episode. That was just anchored to place and heard those two noises over and over again. I asked him where he had gotten the whole information of the skin because I can't find anything like it online, and he told me the same friend who supposedly encountered a skinwalker told him. My brother thought they were made up at first, but wanted to amuse me with the story of them on that very night. I asked him why he apparently couldn't hear that thing screech for the first time. He told me that oddly, everything was dead silent, and it wasn't until I lurched free of the forest that he heard that thing's wail. That's when I remembered my most important question, a question I've been trying to think of an answer for years. Josh, when we got into the RV and I told Dad that it was some up creature, what happened after I passed out? My brother froze for a few seconds, looking down at his plate and just chewing. He swallowed his food and finally spoke. Dad told me to lie to you before I woke up. He knew what happened. Mom and I both witnessed it, but they didn't want you to know any details. That whole experience you up good for at least a few weeks. You had night terrors, right? Yeah, I did, but what did you see? The rest of the night was silent after that. That thing probably wandered off or was never able to find us. So I remember we all kind of just fell asleep in our beds. Mom embraced you the whole time, and you were mumbling in your sleep. For words. They weren't coherent at first, and I guess only I heard them because Mom and Dad were both asleep by then. I don't have it. That thing yelled at me before I started running at me. This screech of a voice, give it back. I think that's why. My brother picked at his teeth before continuing to talk. That's not all. I remember waking up in the morning. Mom and Dad were outside the RV. Mom was horrified and crying. Dad couldn't look, so I came out and Mom tried to cover my eyes, but I saw it, nearly through right there. Sheriff came just a couple minutes later. If you're wondering, he was of no help. I stared at him with a combination of curiosity and fright. I felt an overwhelming chill run down my spine, though one that would never compare to the ones I had while I was stuck in the middle of the forest. What did you see? The sides of the RV, even the roof, were covered in reddish-brown splotches, visibly dried and crusted into the RV's paint. My brother winced for a split second, but continued, staring me in the eyes. They had all shape I didn't recognize at first, but seconds before Mom covered my eyes, I could tell that they were handprints. While we slept, that bastard came back and crawled all over the RV. I finished his sentence. Because it was looking for me. I don't know what truly lurks in the dark crevices of Earth, but I know now not all of them are feral. Some used to be people like you and me, but they were robbed of everything they had. The very matter that covers their body shields the meat from the outside world, the cold, empty outside world. It's driven me crazy. I remember thinking about how negative my brother was, bringing up all these awful things he's done in the past, how much I despised him prior. Yet he saved my life. What if he was the one who went into the forest? What if he was the one who ran out of the forest, out of breath and vomiting? What if I abandoned him? What if he was the one who was dragged into the forest, gone without a trace? I would never, ever see him again, not me, not our parents, not the friends or teachers or other supervisors he's had that have broken their backs over the years, trying to make him a nicer person. If the chances were different that night, one of us would not be present today. Maybe even both. Yet there's one thing that still unnerves me about this incident, is that whatever truly that creature was, it's still out there in that dark, silent forest, condemned to walk in animate limbo, searching for not just its ripped away skin and flesh, but something else that was ripped out of it. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.